evidence of it actually being released in Europe. The only images are from the US version, with it being a late release in the console's life. Not many copies were produced. The NES game featured 11 stages, starting out in the future, working your way up from the sewers avoiding Terminators, then on land, which leads you to the driving section, avoiding shots from the hunter killers, and you find yourself in a bland brick building, avoiding random spikes until you reach the time machine. Back in 1984, you have to get past the police, dogs and punks on the streets as you enter the mall, where in the film he finds his clothes. Then on the roof you work your way down to find Sarah. The game switches to a top-down view as you get chased by the Terminator. Once you are arrested, you escape with Sarah from the police station, and again you are chased by the Terminator in another driving section, until you find yourself in the factory, where you get to go into hand-to-hand combat with the Terminator before he's inevitably crushed. You never actually get to see Arnold as a sprite. I'm not sure if the ones at the beginning count, but he is greatly missing from the game, and only appears as part of a static image to continue the story. The game reviewed poorly across the board, looking dated and ugly in the graphics department, and the music and sound effects are grating on one's ears. It probably has one of the worst soundtracks I've ever heard on the NES. Once you complete it, there is no credits to show you who worked on the game. I suppose no one wanted their name attached to this turkey. To give the game credit, it at least tries to offer more than the Sega versions. But if it's difficult to control and play, it doesn't matter how long the game is, and it demonstrated that by throwing more into the game, it didn't result in a fun experience for the player. CVG awarded it 61%, telling their readers to give it a miss, summing it up as a boring platformer with far better examples on the old console. The Super Nintendo game arrived in April of 1993, and again it's unclear if it ever got a UK release, despite being reviewed in May of that year. The only evidence of a PAL version is from Germany. The SNES would follow a similar stage layout to the NES version. The combat in the future is very much inspired by Contra, but less fun. You find yourself getting overwhelmed by Terminators and all sorts of random robots. Most folk probably struggle to get past the first level, as it goes on for too long. The rest of the platforming in 1984 is a nightmare, and the driving sections, though look far better than its NES counterpart, are extremely difficult to survive for more than a minute. It can be done, but takes some persistence. The game's music, thankfully, is not awful. It does have some decent sound samples, and some eerie sound effects on the future levels, though it does sound like someone's stomach is rumbling. The game doesn't make use of Brad Fidell's main theme, though it uses the score composed for the factory sequence for the main title of the game. The SNES version was critiqued for its high difficulty and dated graphics. It hardly looked 16-bit. It had frustrating gameplay, in particular with Kyle Reese making his way across the buildings with many leaps of faith having to be made to continue and often dying in the process. The novelty of the driving sections wore off after a few minutes, making the whole experience of playing the game a chore. The official Nintendo magazine in the UK gave it 47%, saying shambling, drab and undercooked. Everything a game licensed to such a major film shouldn't be. Avoid this at all costs. CVG were less harsh, awarding it 70%, complaining it was just too difficult, had dodgy sprites, and the bland backdrops gave it an 8-bit feel. And the last game that will be based on the 1984 film will be the Sega/Mega CD version that arrived in the USA in June of 1993 and in January of 94 for the UK. The Mega CD version is how these CD upgrades should be. For the majority of the time, the games on the Sega add-on would essentially be the Mega Drive version with Red Book audio and a few FMV cutscenes, essentially making these deluxe versions, and many gamers and critics felt it wasn't really worth upgrading to the Mega CD. But the Terminator was completely changed from the ground up. New level and sprite design, more stages, everything felt bigger. They would have a larger team working on this release with a lot more artists involved, with David Perry returning to assist with the programming. The original Mega Drive version dedicated one level to the future war. The CD version gave you 4 levels, with 2 out in the wasteland and 2 inside Skynet. As you get there a minute too late, as you see the T-800 go through the time-displacement unit, you then follow after him after defeating the boss character. Once arriving in 1984, you have to work your way through 2 levels on the streets until you reach Tech Noir. After getting past the Terminator, you then have to escape from the police station and battle your way through the factory, which features 2 levels, mostly avoiding these machines that attack you until the Terminator makes his appearance. Once you've blown his legs off, we see Sarah flicking the switch to crush the cyborg. The Mega Drive game could be completed in, say, 15 minutes. The Mega CD version could take you nearly an hour. They of course include FMV clips from the Terminator film, which are a grainy mess, but at the time it was still a nice novelty. But in hindsight it would have been nice for them to have created original animated sequences. The game is well known for its rocking soundtrack by Tommy Tallarico, who produced a number of tracks for the game and supervised the music, with additional songs contributed by other artists, such as Joey Carras and Brad Fidel, though the Terminator theme seems to be a re-recording, not the original theme from the movie's soundtrack album. The game utilised Q Sound to create a 3D soundscape. Capcom would famously start using it for their CPS2 hardware with the introduction of Super Street Fighter 2. Tallarico said the game's graphics were still very much 16-bit looking, and the music you'd hear would be like music on the radio or an album, and it was a bit jarring. Tommy said I would get into screaming matches with the producers because they told me they didn't want that proper music in the game. They said it doesn't sound like a video game, and Tommy said exactly, it doesn't have to anymore. Virgin were ultimately so impressed with the music it got its own release. The Mega CD version is today a must-have title for the Mega Drive add-on, but at the time the reviews were not too enthusiastic. Mega Magazine awarded it 67%, saying it's a well-presented blast, but boring and very samey and a bit of a waste. Sega Power gave it a lower score of 58%, saying the graphics are awful, there was loads of better platform shoot-em-ups on the Mega Drive, the music is great, but that can't save the game. GamePro magazine thankfully saw the positives, saying the smooth sprite animation and the great backgrounds make this a visual treat, and will keep you fascinated and frustrated for hours. It's unclear if the game sold well, but it has become a hot collector's item and fetches well over £150 now, especially the UK version due to its superior artwork.
It is our purpose to extend a helping hand to all those in need.
I know what I want. I want to be free.
But I ask you, do you not wish to know the truth?
The fun is just getting started.
My first experience playing the Terminator games was on the Sega Mega Drive as a kid, and first seeing it I thought it looked amazing. The graphics were awesome and the action was non-stop. I loved it when Reese fired that shotgun at a fast rate. It made such a cool sound effect, and my friend clearly knew I liked it, and said if I wanted to swap games with him. I had Two Crude Dudes, which wasn't a great game, but I enjoyed it at the time and had just finished it. So we traded games, and once I got home I found myself completing the Terminator in about 20 minutes, on my first go. I was really gutted. My friend obviously didn't tell me it was a painfully short game. Despite it being a quick game to play through, I have gone back to it many times over the years. I think because of its short nature, it is easy to pick up and play. When you are older and have less time, playing a game such as this is a great way to chill out and to get that quick fix on retro gaming. But back in 1992 when it came out, paying like £40 for it would have felt like a major rip-off, considering how painfully short it was. The Master System and Game Gear ports are surprisingly good. They are very close to the Mega Drive version and retain the gameplay with hardly any cutbacks. They do have a different colour palette in the stage design, and the sprites are smaller, but this port makes for a nice alternative, and are strong titles for those 8-bit machines. The DOS game is one I heard about but never knew anyone who owned it, and only experienced it years later. It is a weird one. It's certainly very ambitious and ahead of its time with its ideas, but doesn't really provide an enjoyable experience. It has wonderful detailed cutscenes, but once you are in that 3D world, it's too slow and clunky to get around. It's difficult to make out who is who with the 3D characters. The bright, colourful 3D world doesn't feel like you're playing a Terminator game, more like a crude Lego game. The vast number of functions on the keyboard make it difficult to remember how to control the game as well. There are certainly fans of it who experienced it back in the day and have that nostalgia for it, but playing it now, you would only do it out of curiosity. It's pretty obvious the Nintendo versions are best avoided, especially the NES game, which is a massive turd. It does to its credit try to be faithful to the film by expanding upon the flashback sequences to battle hunter killers and has the 2 chases with the Terminator, but it's frustrating to play with clunky controls, involving pixel-perfect jumping, contains ugly graphics, especially for a late release in the console's life, and horrendous music, up there as one of the worst licensed titles. The SNES version is not quite as bad as the NES game, but it's still a stinker. It does incorporate some nice cutscenes for the opening of the game and first level, but they soon drop that idea and just feature, like the Mega Drive version, digital stills from the film. The first level is ludicrously long, with the Terminators popping up out of nowhere and firing non-stop. The Terminator sprites move around like they are busting for the toilet. You face off against a hunter-killer, thinking this is the end boss of the level, but oh no, it continues on. Such awful game design throughout, the other levels are just horrible and repetitive. It's not a fun experience, and I was glad when I finally finished it. The final stage appears at first to be the closest to the movie than all the other games, as Kyle avoids the Terminator by bashing him with a lead pipe, and then attaches the bomb to it and dies on explosion. but the Terminator also is defeated and is not crushed in the process by Sarah. It was nearly there but messed it up at the end. The one I would highly recommend, and I'm sure most will agree, is the Mega CD version. Great graphics with awesome backgrounds and smooth animation. It does a great job of expanding the Mega Drive game by basically offering more stages to each setting, though again they avoid the car chases, which would have been cool if done in the same fashion as Batman Returns on the Mega CD, but I'm guessing that would have cost more money in development time and coding. The FMV sequences are not needed, they are super grainy and barely watchable, but the music and presentation is top notch. The platform gameplay is fast and action-packed, though shooting in different directions isn't as flexible as one would want. You have to be in the right position for the character to aim up at a certain angle. It's not as freewheeling as it should be. The game isn't amazing, it's just a solid platformer that makes the best efforts to provide a game that focuses on Kyle Reese's story, and the results are a strong licensed title that is certainly worth playing. What could have made these Terminator games great was if the license holder was far less strict on the developers. We didn't see Orion Pictures being difficult with Data East and Ocean Software on Robocop, I suppose down to them not having Arnold's likeness. Things quickly became problematic, but I'm sure there could have been workarounds. Having the option to play as the Terminator as well on the console games, it would have provided a larger game. The opportunity to play as a cyborg from the future gunning down the police instead of Kyle Reese would have made more sense, and then chasing after Kyle and Sarah by car and motorbike. It could have made a more exciting game. Then you have two endings, one with a dark finale